Hello there, Michelle Short here for My Favourite Things. Today I have an underwater see-through acetate SIN card to share with you. So let's get started. This is the Mermaid for Each Other stamp set. It's absolutely adorable. I love the expressions on their faces. I have stamped one of the mermaids, the octopus and some of the seaweed onto smooth white cardstock using black ink. I'm then going to colour the images using Copic markers. Copic markers are my kind of go-to colouring medium. I find them a little bit quicker and a little bit easier to use compared to some other colouring mediums. So I definitely do gravitate towards using them. I'm mapping out my darkest area for her skin using E13. And then I'm going to blend that out using the E11 marker. I have taken the cap off of the other end of the marker. This is because this marker is really juicy and it tends to blob out ink when I don't want it to. So if I remove the cap off of the other end, it just removes some of the pressure in the marker and then it won't blob anywhere. I'm then blending that out using the E51 marker. And then before I go in with my lightest shade, I want to add a little bit of pink blush to her cheeks. So I'm going to go in with the R20 marker and I'm just kind of making sort of semicircle onto her cheeks, on one on either side, and that's just going to add a little bit of blush to her cheeks. I can then fill in the rest of the skin using E50. And I'm going over that kind of blush mark on the right hand side just to blend that out and make sure that it doesn't kind of look like it's just sort of added on top. So we can finish off by colouring the rest of her skin in, and then I'm going to colour in her hair. I was very tempted to colour in her hair maybe like purple or something like that, but I am going to use purple on the rest of the image. So I decided in the end to use some kind of light browns. I'm starting off with my darkest shade, which is E57, and I'm doing this hair in kind of sections, if that makes sense. So I could have just coloured it as one whole section, but I decided to colour it in separate sections, kind of like how it's drawn. So I'm adding the darkest colour towards the left hand side of the hair. And then I can go in with the E55 and blend that out. Followed by the E53. Then the E51. And then I can finish off with the E50. For her tail, I'm going to use some teal aqua tones, starting off with BG49. And then I can blend that out with the BG15. Followed by the BG13, the BG11, and then finish off with the BG10. And then for the rest of the images, so the starfish in her hair and the heart she's holding, I'm going to colour those with some purple markers. Whilst purple isn't necessarily a colour that I would ordinarily colour in a starfish with, I did think it would work quite nicely. I didn't really want to add too many colours onto this card, and so I thought that having just the purple, the aqua tones, and then obviously the colours for her skin tones and her hair, and then also the seaweed was probably enough colour on this card. So I thought it still worked out quite nicely with the purples for the starfish, even though they're not quite accurate. So I used V17, V15, V12. And then for the octopus, I'm blending that out with the V01 and then the V000. And that octopus smile is just absolutely adorable. Then for the seaweed pieces, I'm using G29, YG17, YG23, and then finishing off with YG01. And when I stamped these seaweed pieces, I did stamp some of them upside down. That was just so that I could have a little bit more interest on the card and they be sort of slightly different shapes. I'm then going to cut the images out with the coordinating dynamics, and for the octopus the tentacles are actually kind of enclosed and sometimes it's a little bit difficult to see where you're placing the die, so I've cut that out first with some white cardstock, and then I'm going to use the negative portion and place that over the top of the image. I'm going to line it up so that the outside edge is hopefully sort of symmetrical on each side. Hold that down with some low tack tape, and then once I add the die on top, it's going to kind of fit in a bit like a puzzle piece, and then I can stick that down with some more low tack tape. I'm then going to take the rest of the coordinating dynamics, place those over the images, and then I can run those through my die cutting machine and pop those out. And I did have to do this multiple times for the seaweed images. For the background, I'm taking a piece of the Sand, Surf and Sky 6x6 paper pad, and I'm taking this one here that kind of looks a little bit like waves, and I'm going to die cut that out using the largest of the Stitched Hexagon Stacks Dynamics. I used this on a card not that long ago and I really love how it looks for backgrounds. It kind of just focuses your eye onto the images itself, kind of like a focal point. And although I think this looks lovely as is, I wanted to add a little bit of more interest to it, so I'm going to add some ink blending on top using Peacock Feathers Distress ink, and I'm just going around all of the edges of this piece here, but I'm focusing most of the colour towards the bottom. I wanted it to sort of be a little bit darker at the bottom, sort of going further down on sort of at the bottom of the sea. I've then got my images here and I'm kind of just placing them down just so that I can see where I want them to be before I stick anything down. And I'm going to stick the pieces of seaweed towards the bottom, but I'm going to have them hanging quite low, sort of, you're only going to see the top parts of the seaweed, and that's because I didn't want it to look like a seabed necessarily, but I still wanted it to look like they were a little bit further down in the ocean. So I'm adding some On Point Precision Glue just to the top pieces of the seaweed, and then I can place those down one by one. And I'm just using some tweezers just to help me out placing them down. There is a background stamp with that kind of wave pattern, and I was tempted to use that, and I thought that I could maybe do some embossed resist with it, but actually it was really quick and easy just to die cut that patterned paper and then add the ink blending on top. Once the glue had dried, I'm just going to cut those pieces off from the outside edges, and then I'm going to stick this panel down onto another panel that I've cut using the Stitched Hexagon Dynamics from some white cardstock. That's just going to give it a little bit extra stability. The pattern paper actually is really quite thick. It's a really lovely patterned paper, but I did just want to add that stability to it. I'm now adding the panel onto a see-through acetate card base. So this is a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches, an A2 sized card base. I've then cut that panel, the hexagon panel, another 3 times so that I can add those onto the other sides of the card base. So I'm adding one onto the back of the card base first so that I can line it up with the front panel, and then I'm going to add more panels on the inside. So there is one on the back of the front piece, there is also one on the inside so that I can write a message, and then one on the back as well, and that's going to cover up all of that adhesive. I've added some thin foam tape onto the back of the mermaid, and I can use some tweezers again just to hover her in place before I stick her down. Once I'm happy with her, I can then press her down. For the octopus, I did take the die cut piece, the positive piece that I cut when I was making the mask, and I did that onto the back. So that octopus is now 2 layers high of die cuts, and then so I've just added foam tape towards the top. I've then heat embossed a sentiment onto black cardstock from the Mermaid for Each Other stamp set, and I'm just adhering that down onto the card with a little bit of foam tape on the left hand side, so that when you open the card you do see some black cardstock but you don't see any adhesive showing through. And then to finish off the card, I thought I would add some iridescent droplets to look a little bit like bubbles in the water. So I've added small dabs of the On Point Precision Glue, and then I can pop the droplets on top using an embellishment wand. And I really love having that acetate card base. I think it works quite well for an underwater scene. And then having the images onto that hexagon shape, I think it just draws your eye into the focal point. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.